What happens when a retired NFL legend casually tosses a hot take into the feed, and an entire franchise explodes in response? That's the setup here. A veteran voice called out a young quarterback. A mother fired back with blistering words, and a team's reaction turned a few sentences into a full-blown headline. This isn't just another preseason squabble. It's a collision of reputation, expectation, and raw emotion. And it's got the league watching. Shedeur Sanders entered the pros wearing a name that comes with its own gravity. Being Deion Sanders' son doesn't just bring spotlight. It brings magnified expectations. Every look, every gesture, every sideline moment becomes a headline. Some fans love that drama. Some analysts sniff it out as a flaw. Into that pressure cooker stepped a voice few expected to make a fuss. Rex Ryan. Known for blunt, unapologetic commentary, he didn't offer gentle critique. He unloaded. He joked, he mocked, and he implied that attitude, not ability, was the big. When a commentator with that pedigree frames a young QB as an embarrassment, it reverberates beyond the broadcast booth. Then, the story flipped. Instead of allowing the narrative to be a two-way debate, commentator versus player, someone else entered the ring. Pilar Sanders didn't post a calm rebuttal or a measured defense. She struck back with words designed to sting. Her message reframed the issue from technical critique to something more personal. A call-out of tone, envy, and what she described as toxic energy. That pivot changed the story's center of gravity. It stopped being about whether Shedeur could read a defense. It became about whether our culture tolerates tearing young players down for clicks. What followed was predictably chaotic. Social feeds split, pundits parsed every syllable, and the Browns front office, rather than letting silence cool the flames, responded publicly in a way that magnified the drama. Add to that a viral preseason moment, a brutal sack, and a shaky outing, and you've got all the ingredients for a narrative that refuses to die. Suddenly, the question isn't only can Shedeur play, it's can he withstand the storm of expectation, and will the team protect him or let outside noise define him? This moment matters because it reveals a deeper clash. The old-school belief that public chewing out toughens players versus a new era where athletes, their families, and fans expect respect and nuance. It also exposes a fragile franchise tendency. Instead of diffusing criticism with performance, the organization fanned the flames and turned the spotlight inward. So what's next? Will this become the spark that ignites a breakout performance, the story of an underdog proving doubters wrong? Or will it mark the start of a long shadow that follows every misstep? The answer will come on the field, not in the tweets. But before we get to those plays, we need to unpack what was actually said and why one broadcast clip set off a chain reaction. Outing, and you've got all the ingredients for a narrative that refuses to die. Suddenly, the question isn't only can Shedeur play, it's can he withstand the storm of expectation? And will the team protect him or let outside noise define him? This moment matters because it reveals a deeper clash. The old school belief that public chewing out toughens players versus a new era where athletes, their families, and fans expect respect and nuance. It also exposes a fragile franchise tendency. Instead of defusing criticism with performance, the organization fanned the flames and turned the spotlight inward. So what's next? Will this become the spark that ignites a breakout performance? The story of an underdog proving doubters wrong? Or will it mark the start of a long shadow that follows every misstep? The answer will come on the field, not in the tweets. But before we get to those plays, we need to unpack what was actually said and why one broadcast clip set off a chain reaction that's still burning. If you followed the NFL for any amount of time, you know Rex Ryan doesn't exactly specialize in subtlety. This is a man who built a reputation on loud press conferences, bold guarantees, and never pulling a punch when a microphone is in front of him. So when he turned his sights on Shedeur Sanders, Nobody should have been surprised that it wasn't going to be gentle feedback. Still, even by Rex's standards, what he said hit like a sledgehammer. On air, Ryan started by questioning why Browns coach Kevin Stefanski hadn't put Shedeur into a more prominent role yet. But instead of leaving it at that, he went straight for Shedeur's image. He mocked the way Shedeur sits on the sideline with his arms crossed, suggesting that he looked more like someone daydreaming in the back row of class than a quarterback preparing to lead an NFL team. His exact words painted Shedeur as running his mouth like he's a starter, when in Ryan's eyes, he hadn't earned that right yet. And then came the gut punch. Rex flat out called him an embarrassment. Think about that for a second. He didn't question Shedeur's throwing mechanics, his ability to read defenses, or even his decision-making on the field. He went after his body language and his attitude. That's not a critique. It's an attack on character. For a rookie quarterback already under a microscope because of his last name, that kind of comment doesn't just sting, it sticks. And here's why Rex's words mattered. He's not just another analyst or ex-player tossing around opinions. He's a former head coach who once led teams to back-to-back AFC championship games. His voice carries weight. When he calls a young QB an embarrassment, that label doesn't just disappear after the commercial break. It lingers, repeated in headlines, recycled on social media, and whispered in locker rooms across the league. The timing made it even worse. Shedeur had already been facing questions about whether he could live up to the hype. His preseason performance hadn't silenced the critics, and highlight reels of him taking a massive sack were already bouncing around the internet. Into that environment dropped Rex Ryan, adding gasoline to an already blazing fire. For many, it felt like Ryan was less interested in analyzing football and more interested in making Shedeur into an example. Another reminder that the NFL can be just as much about perception as it is about performance. And that's why this moment hit so hard. Because if enough powerful voices keep pushing the embarrassment narrative, it can overshadow everything else a young player is trying to build. But as harsh as Ryan's words were, they didn't end the conversation. In fact, they only set the stage for something even louder. The kind of response that turned a coach's rant into a family feud. Rex Ryan thought he was just throwing shade at a young quarterback. What he probably didn't expect was that the loudest response wouldn't come from Shedeur, or even from the Browns locker room. It came from Shedeur's mother, Shedeur Sanders. And when she spoke, she didn't hold back. Her statement wasn't a calm clapback. It wasn't polished PR language carefully worded to smooth things over. It was raw, emotional, and cut straight to the bone. She described Ryan's words as impotent, cancerous, envious energy, adding that this kind of evil wasn't new, but deeply rooted, embedded in blood and bone. Those are heavy words, the kind that stop you mid-scroll and make you read them again. And that's what made her response so powerful. It didn't sound like a simple defense of her son. It sounded like a mother who has seen this pattern before. Critics tearing down young athletes, flaming their confidence as arrogance, and treating them as characters in a media circus instead of human beings. Her words weren't just about Shedeur. They were about the culture of criticism that has followed athletes for decades. The reaction was immediate. Fans lit up social media, some cheering her on with comments like, "That's how you defend family," and finally someone saying what needed to be said. For many, Pillar's response was refreshing, an unfiltered counterpunch to an industry that often rewards the loudest critic over the most thoughtful analysis. But just as many questioned whether she went too far. Some argued that her fiery language might reinforce the very narrative Rex Ryan had painted, that Shedeur needed others to defend him instead of standing tall himself. Others suggested that while her passion was understandable, it risked distracting from the real issue, Shedeur proving himself on the field. Either way, one thing was clear. Shedeur Sanders shifted the conversation. Rex Ryan's comments could have come and gone as another headline in a crowded sports news cycle. But her response elevated the story into something larger. Now, it wasn't just about one coach's rant. It was about respect, about family, and about how much criticism is too much for a young player still finding his place in the league. And that's why this moment resonated so widely. Parents don't usually step into NFL debates. When they do, it makes headlines. But Shedur's voice wasn't just another headline. It was a declaration that no amount of criticism, no matter how public or harsh, would go unanswered when it targeted her son. But the story didn't stop there. Because just as the internet was digesting her words, another voice, one with its own legendary reputation, added fuel to the fire. And this time, it wasn't a coach. It was a Super Bowl champion with a warning that shook Cleveland to its core. Just when the Rex Ryan vs. Shedeur Sanders storm seemed big enough, another name entered the conversation: Jason Kelce. And if you know anything about Kelce, you know he doesn't do small talk. The man's retired, decorated, and free to say whatever he wants without worrying about locker room politics. So when he opened his mouth about the Browns, it wasn't just an opinion. It was a warning shot. Kelce's message was simple but devastating. He suggested that trouble was brewing in Cleveland, hinting that heads might roll if things didn't turn around. He even singled out head coach Kevin Stefanski, pointing out that the friction around Shedeur Sanders' arrival wasn't Stefanski's choice at all, but rather the GM's decision. That's not just speculation about football. It's exposing cracks in the very foundation of the franchise. And the way Kelce delivered it made it sting even more. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't ranting. He just laid it out like fact, like a storm siren warning the city what was about to come. For a franchise already under pressure, it felt less like a prediction and more like a prophecy. Now, here's where things took a turn. Instead of brushing it off, nodding politely, or even staying quiet, the Browns owner reacted. And not with calm, not with strategy, but with what looked like pure panic. His response wasn't measured or tactical. It came off like an angry outburst, the kind you'd expect from a fan on Twitter, not from the man running a billion-dollar franchise. That reaction made everything worse. Because when an owner publicly snaps back at a retired player, it doesn't silence criticism, it confirms it. It sends the message: we're rattled, we're insecure, and you've hit a nerve. Suddenly, the focus wasn't on Jason Kelce's words, but on the Browns' meltdown in the face of them. For fans, it was almost comical. Cleveland has a long history of collapses and controversies. So hearing a warning wasn't new. What was new was how spectacularly the team's leadership managed to fumble the response. Instead of proving Kelce wrong with actions on the field, they gave him exactly what he wanted: proof that Cleveland still can't handle pressure. And the timing couldn't have been worse. With preseason performances already under the microscope, and Shedeur's every snap dissected online, the last thing the Browns needed was to show cracks at the top. But that's exactly what happened. And of course, once a franchise shows weakness, the vultures circle. Media outlets, rival fan bases, and even former players couldn't resist piling on. Which meant the next wave wasn't just about one warning or one meltdown. It was about the entire football world reacting to Cleveland's chaos. The second Jason Kelce's words collided with the Browns owner's meltdown, the internet did what it always does. It split into camps and set the takes on fire. And this wasn't just another debate over play calling or quarterback depth charts. This was about respect, reputation, and how far criticism should go when a team is already wobbling. On one side, fans were cheering Kelce. They praised him for saying what many already felt but were too tired to repeat. Finally, someone with the guts to say it out loud, one viral comment read. Others echoed the same sentiment, that Cleveland has a history of overhyping quarterbacks and then watching them collapse under the weight of dysfunction. For these fans, Kelce wasn't an enemy. He was a truth-teller holding up a mirror the Browns didn't want to face. But another corner of the internet wasn't having it. They turned their focus on Shedeur Sanders, saying her fiery words only fed the narrative that Shedeur needed protecting. To them, Ryan's bluntness was just old-school football talk, and anyone offended by it was proving his point. These fans argued that Shedeur hasn't earned the right to be untouchable, and that criticism, even harsh criticism, is part of what comes with the NFL spotlight. Then came the analysts. Sports shows lit up with heated panels. Some former players backed Rex Ryan, claiming they'd heard similar doubts from scouts and coaches behind closed doors. Others defended Shedeur and Pilar, pointing out that questioning body language and character is a cheap shot compared to breaking down actual film. One analyst summed it up perfectly. This wasn't critique. It was character assassination. And tucked between the noise were the players themselves. A few subtle likes on Pilar's post, some cryptic emojis from current pros. It wasn't a flood of support, but enough to suggest that Shedeur isn't the only one who feels the weight of unfair criticism. Athletes who've been through the same fire recognize the moment for what it was. A young quarterback carrying not just his own expectations, but the baggage of a franchise and a famous last name. The split reactions told the real story. This wasn't just about Shedeur Sanders. It was about the culture of football itself. Should players be hardened by public humiliation? Or should the old guard learn that respect matters even when pointing out flaws? That's the line everyone seemed to be arguing over. But while fans and analysts debated online, the real test was about to move onto the field. Because once the ball is snapped, no hot take or viral quote matters more than performance. And for Shedeur, the question looming over everything was simple. How will this storm affect his career? Every young quarterback faces a moment when the spotlight burns hotter than ever. For Shedeur Sanders, that moment came before he even had a chance to prove himself on the field. And the fallout from Rex Ryan's words, Shedeur Sanders' defense, and Jason Kelce's warning isn't just noise. It's shaping the perception of his entire career before it even begins. The biggest challenge? Image. In the NFL, how you're perceived can matter almost as much as how you perform. When someone like Rex Ryan calls you an embarrassment, that label doesn't just vanish. Coaches hear it, teammates hear it, and the narrative spreads fast. Is Shedeur really ready, or is he just hype wrapped in swagger? That kind of question can follow a player, especially one carrying a famous last name. But there's opportunity buried in the chaos. The league loves a redemption story. Plenty of quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, were once labeled too raw, too arrogant, or not built for the position. They flipped the script not with words, but with performances that silenced every critic. If Shedeur takes this moment personally, digs deeper, and starts stacking wins, the same media that doubted him will be the first to call him a breakout star. The Browns situation complicates things. Head coach Kevin Stefanski reportedly wasn't fully on board with drafting Shedeur, which only adds fuel to speculation about locker room tension. When a coach and front office aren't perfectly aligned, the quarterback often becomes the lightning rod for frustration. That makes every rep Shedeur gets in practice and every snap he takes in games a referendum. Not just on his talent, but on whether he belongs in the building at all. Then there's the locker room factor. Teammates want to see how a quarterback responds to pressure. If Shedeur shrugs off the noise, keeps grinding, and shows resilience, he'll earn their respect quickly. But if he shows signs of frustration or lets the outside chatter distract him, the narrative of immaturity will only grow louder. For a young QB, winning over the locker room can be just as important as winning over fans. So what does this moment mean for Shedeur Sanders' career? It's a fork in the road. Either he becomes the player who proved Rex Ryan wrong and turned criticism into fuel, or he risks becoming the player remembered more for drama than for dominance. For Cleveland, it's just as pivotal. Handled the right way, Shedeur could inject new energy into a franchise desperate for consistency. Handled poorly, he could become another chapter in a long book of what-ifs. And that's the cliffhanger, because while the noise is deafening off the field, the only answer that matters will come under the stadium lights. At first glance, this story looked like a simple exchange. An outspoken coach criticizes a young quarterback, a parent defends him, and a retired player chimes in with a warning. But when you zoom out, it's clear this saga is about far more than Shedeur Sanders. It's about a culture shift happening right in front of us, one that pits the old school philosophy of tear them down to toughen them up, against a new era where players, families, and fans expect respect to coexist with critique. Rex Ryan represented the old guard, fiery, blunt, and unapologetic. His words weren't just about football, they were about pride, attitude, and toughness. For decades, those kinds of comments were brushed off as part of the game. But Shedeur Sanders' fiery defense showed that those days are changing. Parents, fans, and even fellow players aren't staying quiet anymore when criticism crosses into personal attack. Instead, they're demanding a different kind of accountability, one that recognizes the line between constructive critique and toxic energy. Jason Kelce's involvement only amplified the spotlight. He didn't rant, he delivered his thoughts like a warning flare. And when the Browns' owner snapped back in anger, it confirmed everything Kelce had hinted at, that dysfunction and insecurity still live at the heart of the franchise. What could have been a forgettable soundbite turned into a storyline that will now shadow Cleveland throughout the season. And caught in the middle is Shedeur Sanders. Fair or not, his every move will now be framed through the lens of this controversy. If he falters, critics will say Rex was right. If he thrives, his success will be seen as vindication against the noise. That's the double-edged sword of Spotlight. It can cut you down, or it can carve out your legend. For the Browns, the takeaway is even harsher. In the NFL, silence is often the smartest weapon. Win games, and every critic fades away. Lose games, and no press release can save you. Cleveland chose the loud route, and in doing so, they gave this saga a life of its own. So the question that lingers isn't just about Shedeur. It's about us, the fans, and the league itself. Do we reward controversy over performance? Do we let personal attacks define careers before they even start? Or do we start recognizing that sometimes the loudest voices aren't the most accurate ones? Because here's the truth. Shedeur's future won't be decided on talk shows, in Instagram posts, or even in fiery clapbacks. It will be decided on the field, one throw at a time. And until then, all anyone can do is watch, wait, and wonder. Now it's your turn. Do you think Rex Ryan was brutally honest, or did he cross the line? And did Shedur's defense strengthen Shedeur's image, or just pour gas on the fire? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.